Okay, we are live with the third Teflon Tales panel. With me today, I have two past guests who've been on the Teflon Tales before, Rashmi Ketha and Sree, and we have a brand new Teflon Tales guest, Ayesha. So, welcome Sree, welcome Ayesha, welcome Rashmi.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank you,
having us.
Ashwin.
So today's topic is something that I think we all hear about, encounter, but I really want to hear your perspective, which is really about um, people who encounter the glass ceiling in their professional careers. So, in terms of your personal journeys, number one, do you believe there is or there was a glass ceiling? How did you discover it? And any personal stories, attributes of yours that helped you kind of break through the glass. So, Aisha, why don't we start with you?
Well, thank you again, Ashwin, for having me. I'm excited to be here on there for the first time. Glass ceiling. So, I don't know if I would call it exactly like shattering the glass ceiling, so to speak, but I think in my journey personally, and I think back immediately when you asked that question, what came to mind for me was the moment when I first got into cybersecurity. And one of my early mentors, his advice to me, and I genuinely think he was trying to help me. And he's one, well-respected man, but his advice to me was, Aisha, unfortunately, we live in a world where you will always have to work twice as hard as your male peers. And and this was what led to me to work twice as hard, right? All the challenges that I have faced along the way, I've always assumed that I'm having to work twice as hard than my male peers. It's also led to moments where I've had, yes, absolutely, moments where I've had a lot of imposter syndrome. Am I good enough? Am I doing the right things? And I'm looking at peers that are working half the time as me, yet being paid twice as much as me, yet I'm concerned about, as a woman, as a person of color, am I good enough, right? So when it comes to glass ceilings, I would say, I'm really proud that, last year when I was a chief revenue officer for a cybersecurity firm, at that time in 2020, as I can recall, is one of the only female South Asians that held that role in cyber. And that's impressive, right? And that's a shattering moment for me. And before taking on to that role, I was definitely worried and concerned, and perception of having that imposter syndrome really impacted me. And when another company recruited me, Kayla, where I am today, I was doubting myself. It's like, am I good enough in this role? So I would say, I think that there needs to be a system change, which we'll talk about later. But I think that's been my experience so far.
Rashmi, what's your story?
Yeah, I'll pick it up with the imposter syndrome that you talked about, Ayesha. So my personal story, I kind of pivoted when I was in college, came to college with the traditional like pre-med background in the sciences. And then a little more than halfway, I was like, no, I want to do tech. I want to go into tech. Let's start with basically a computer science course. So I pivoted that, and suddenly you could see just the stark difference in people. In a bio class, it would be like 50-50 male, female, and then suddenly my first like Python class, I would be one of the 4 females in a class of, let's say, like 30 or 40 students. So I could see that just right off the bat, the difference. And then after that, just going into work, after graduating college, I started working at Verizon in the leadership development program. So that is in IT, in data science. It's a 3-year rotation program. So each year for 3 years, I'm starting a new job, a new role. So just with that, onboarding onto the team in tech, kind of being one of the very few females on the team, one of few females of color, and also being one of the younger people on the team. So it's overcoming all those mental hurdles and then going on and be like, hey, your worth, basically. You were on this team for a reason. You know the work that you need to do. Just keep going, push hard, and keep going at it. And one thing that you mentioned, Ayesha, about imposter syndrome, one of my VPs just told us a story recently, and I would love to reiterate that here. And it's about mindset change. What she said is she was talking to her daughter, basically, who was interested in a career in technology, but was not sure if that was the right field because it's so saturated with boys and men who were, and then working with computers. She was like, oh, I don't think it's for me. So my VP, who was her mom, she said, think about how technology has been built within the past 20 to 30 years. How it started. It started with radios, televisions, basically gadgets who would get things done for us. And then a few years down the line, we started putting data into the technology. And data is nothing but the eyes and ears of the tech. It's how a piece of technology would sense, hear, and communicate with the rest of us. With AI, or artificial intelligence, we are putting a brain inside the technology. And with ethics and the conversation with doing good with AI, we're putting a heart in the technology. So when you think about designing the heart of the technology, the brain, the eyes and ears, it comes down to helping humanity in some way. So it's taking that step back, having that mindset change. When you think about it from that far, the field of tech doesn't look like a field for boys or men anymore. It's a field for everyone and helping society in general. And I love that story so much. It's every time I'm like, I think about, hey, am I not good enough for this space, or am I struggling too much? I take that huge step back and I'm like, just think about it. You're doing good for everyone, and there's a place for everyone in that format. So yeah, over
Great
to you.
story. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. Sree, your perspective.
Yeah, I should tell that story to my daughter, I guess. Cool. I'll start with your first question. Is there a glass ceiling that needs to be shattered? Again, my belief is there is no glass ceiling. Having been brought up by like very strong women in India, one of the things that my grandmother always told me, like a very independent women who ran like lakh rupee business, that after my grandpa passed away and she only graduated eighth grade. But what she told me was, there is nothing impossible in this world, but you need to make smart choices on what you want to make possible. Right? So it is what I define as a limit or a goal that I want to achieve. And if there are barriers, uh, those are very self-imposed in some ways, and there are some systemic changes, like I think Ayesha was hinting to, that needs to happen. But should I be deterred by that? I don't believe so. And I also agree with you, ladies. Imposter syndrome is so real, but working through strategies around it is key. And in my own personal journey, I decided to step down on the peak of my career in networking into a completely different domain, like machine learning. And I switched from B2B product management into B2C, then to B2 small businesses. So I have done several pivots, and every time that was a very deliberate attempt on myself to reinvent myself and be more current and relevant in and planning for the longevity of my career, rather than, okay, hey, the short term wins of title and everything else. But that's a very deliberate journey I took. But irrespective of that, every time I've been like, oh my God, am I good enough for this new domain that I'm jumping into? Am I going to be successful? Now, I had a different challenge, Rashi. I know you talked about being young. When I was in networking domain, I was the youngest in amongst all these luminaries in the field. So I used to feel, oh my God, when am I going to become like them, and when am I going to be heard? Then once I grew there and I shifted domains, now I'm like, I have to reinvent myself and figure out, how do I fit in with these millennials, and how do I become relevant for these Gen Zs and look cool? I think Brian mentioned cool. I was like, oh my God, somebody is calling me cool. I've never heard that before. Kind of. So yeah, that's been my journey. So again, I've developed my own strategies on how to overcome some of those imposter syndromes that we can talk about.
So taking perspective forward, which is really about self-discovery, and I know we've heard machine learning, we've heard AI already, right? So, but part of it is human bias and unconscious bias in particular, right? So while the glass ceiling may or may not be there, you're surrounded by people who harbor biases, conscious and unconscious. I'll give you one example of mine, which actually made me wake up, right? And this was a couple of years ago. I was actually doing I was being called to do a reference check for a friend of mine who was raising funds, and the VC had to have a conversation with me. And this was at 5:30 in the evening as I was driving back from work, and there were supposed to be two people on the call, a man and a woman. At the last minute, I had the male text me saying, "Hey, I can't make it, so XYZ, the woman is going to be on the call." And for me, this was a Silicon Valley VC. So my first thought was, why am I talking to an admin if the partner can't make it? And then literally I had to pull the car to the side, look her up, and realize she's a full-fledged partner, right? So for me, that bias about VC equals male equals Silicon Valley was deep-rooted, right? So for me, just that. So my question to, let's start with you, Ayesha, is, in the ecosystem that you are in, right, how have you seen these biases play out? And again, any learnings along the way that you've been able to get people to not only acknowledge, admit there is bias, but also seek change?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. When you think about bias, I think back to the statement that I mentioned earlier to one of my earlier mentors in cybersecurity. What he may not realize it, but that's not something we need to be telling other women, right? Because we want to see equality. But the net of the matter is inherent bias exists. We all have it. And one of the key things that we need to all understand, as even people of color here, is that every single one of us has some sort of privilege here, right? And how do we go about taking action because we have privilege, but also understanding and recognizing that we have bias. Ashwin, I think it's great that you recognize that and that you have set that up that, hey, I'm going to change this about myself. And, while I have dealt with my own biases, for being a female, being younger, like you, Rashmi, in situations, and then also in professional situations, as well as being a person of color, right? And being sitting in a table of men, and my male boss is only asking me why when I'm having children, yet I've got all these single men on the table across from me, right? Why am I the only one being asked? And same thing goes for me. I personally have hired a global team, and I have personally made unintentional decisions on hiring as it relates to my own bias. And frankly, many people are saying this, and I also can say this, even as an Indian immigrant kid, became a naturalized American, who grew up in Indiana, I had my own biases. And in 2020, BLM, actually, it was a wake-up call for me. I learned and recognized, yes, I have bias today. And I need to recognize that and understand that I am privileged. So in turn, what can we do to leverage our privilege and help others, right? And I think that's what's really important. But I think it starts with recognizing, yes, we have bias, and yes, we need to do something to leverage our privilege to help others.
Rashmi, your stories.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just to add on to what you said, Ayesha, it's hard to recognize that internal unconscious bias unless you are in a situation where it forces you to experience it. And Ashwin, you and I were talking, like all of us were talking about this the other day. But it really does take that. You have to kind of step out of your comfort zone, or your zone that you grew up in, that you're used to, and really physically see it from another person's point of view. And the way that I've seen people do it at work, and also I've cultivated like a habit of doing this at work, is we have employee resource groups. Almost every company has this, where you have like different communities and they have conversations, events going on. So when I first started working, I joined the groups which I identified with. There's one for South Asians and there's one for women. So I was like, okay, let me just join these two. These are places that I'm comfortable in. I can contribute in a way. As the years went on, I was like, let me join the one that's for African Americans. Let me join the one that's for Native Americans. Let me join for one that's for people with disabilities. And let me see, what do they talk about? What type of conversations do they have? And how can I bring that back to the places that I'm comfortable with and add depth and breadth to those conversations? So that definitely takes that extra step to put yourself in a place where you're not comfortable, either one you're not comfortable with, or you're just not used to in the first place.
So, Sree, I know you mentioned briefly about your own personal journey along the way as you pushed boundaries, right? But have you seen others also kind of follow along, and or have you seen people change their ways that they're thinking, looking at your progress?
Yeah, I have seen. I think many of my many women come to. I also mentor a lot of product managers and mainly women who are trying to transition into a product management career or and just looking at somebody make that move. I've seen many of my mentees tell me, okay, hey, this gives me the confidence that I can do it. It's okay to take that risk. It's so that's great to see for me. One story that I just want to share. I know we are talking about biases here. I want to touch upon like women. We have a challenge, and then there is this other group, LGBTQ. They have it's even more challenging for them. And I just wanted to share one small personal story from my time. This was early in my career. I had just become an engineering manager, and my manager um, was a transgender and who was a man, and then who came back as a women in my organization, being my manager. So the entire talk in the office, even in my social circle, in at work, everywhere, it was about, okay, hey, what is it like? Because you don't really understand that person's feeling or what they are going through. It's more of, okay, this is new for us. Okay, does she use the men's bathroom or the women's bathroom? Even everywhere else, like to a point, like it became like, okay, how are you reporting to her? It became like a mocking point on me. Okay, hey, how are you even uh, and one thing that I feel as a leader we all have to have is that, okay, hey, how do you understand more? For me, coming from an Indian background, I wasn't aware of some of these challenges. So the one thing that I did was watch every uh, documentary on gender identity disorder, and so that I can educate my team and my surroundings, my kids. I made them like watch, okay, hey, let's watch Barbara Walters. Understand, like you said, Rashmi, joining other groups, right? It's not just about being in your own bubble. If I'm just connected to the Indian bubble, or it doesn't help me, I need to expand my knowledge and be in their shoes to even empathize with them and change my biases. So that's a step I believe as leaders we need to make that effort to not only educate ourselves and educate the people around us. So I know that's personal. I hope it was okay to share.
No, absolutely. I think education is very important to be able to understand. I think thank you Shri, for sharing such a personal story. But I think one of the big things is that we educate ourselves and understand and respect everyone from an equality perspective. But I think it's also important to make sure that you understand the boundaries that we're not crossing either. I think that's something that's very critical to understand as well, because if someone is going through a change themselves, it's an exciting moment for them, but it's also they're dealing with so much judgment and bias. I mean, think about this. Clearly individual had a lot of judgment and bias within your organization, and now think about what they're dealing with on the outside. So understanding that as well, I think is very important too.
Yep.
Yeah, one of the things that I think crossed my mind as you were talking about this is just the ability for, again, Rashmi, you mentioned this in Sree and Ayesha, you guys as well, right? Which is, how do you put yourself in the other person's shoes? And so there are two aspects, right? One is, Rashmi, you're joining groups that you don't technically belong to, but then just being over there for an hour and then walking away is one thing. So one of the things, and this was something I think it was about 6-7 years ago, Dan Schulman, who was the CEO of PayPal, he wanted to experience what it is to be a homeless person. Right? So he spent 24 hours in Manhattan, right, an entire day, night, and literally at the end of it, he says, I was desperate for a cup of coffee and was hoping somebody's going to give me a couple of dollars so I can actually go and buy it at Starbucks. But he knew that he could wait it out another 8 hours and then fly back home and get it, right? But he says that experience of not being able to drink something that he wanted gave him that glimmer of what it is to be homeless, right? So I think there's a company called Perspectives that I was looking up just before our show, and that actually has virtual reality. And the whole aspect behind that is you can actually feel and breathe, and literally they've had experiences, life-changing experiences for folks who have wanted to kind of walk in the shoes of another human being. So there are some interesting ways I think we can empathize with each other. So one question from I know Ayesha, you're a big believer in this, right? Which is for folks who are watching this. What steps can somebody take individually to make, number one, acknowledge their biases, but number two, more importantly, start making small changes to make their workplace, their society more inclusive and make themselves more accessible?
How much time do we have? Well, there are definitely certainly many ways, and I think if you talk about an individual, there, and this is something that we started, a group of us women in cybersecurity, because early on when I joined the industry, it was pretty apparent to me that it was a male-dominated industry, and how can we help each other? But so what we did was essentially created a mentor/mentee program. It's unofficial, but you know what? Anyone and everyone can do it. And what that essentially is, if someone is coming to you and asking you for help professionally, whether it's advice on a project or just general advice on their career, or wants you to introduce them to a hiring manager, the way you accept their thank you is that you ask them, hey, listen, now that I helped you and mentored you in some capacity, I ask you to go help another woman or another person of a marginalized group, and that's how I want you to pay it forward. And honestly, it's been so successful. It was great around hearing from people globally, women globally, International Women's Day, how this small movement has impacted their life and their career. And frankly, it just feels amazing to know that you're helping someone and creating this dominoes effect. I think that's one way to become a mentor if you're not one, and go look out and seek out mentees. So what Rashmi said, what Sree said, having that, how are we going to educate ourselves and understand people from their perspective? Like your mentors and the people you mentee should be very diverse in nature. Push for that diversity so you can understand, also get different perspectives. We talk about different perspective in technology. We talk about the challenges as it relates to, even AI or biometrics, not being diverse enough because of the people behind it, right? That's been a topic as we've seen it in the news. And same goes back to us, our brain is a computer. And if you want it to be diverse in data, then be around more diversity. It's simple as that. And the pay it forward movement, again, is a great way. And honestly, all of us can do it, and all of us can start today. So that's number one. That's for individuals to do. If you want to do this, start today. Call up a friend. Or if someone's calling you, spend that extra time and just help them out. And ask them to go hold that person, help another person, and hold them accountable. Tell them they have to come back and tell you what they did and when they did it. Now, when it comes to organizations, for me, I'm a startup gal, and so I work for a lot of smaller companies, and, they're usually the ones being, have investors lining up. And if you think about a business, so now I'm going to talk to a business, how can you make a change? If I'm a business today, I care about investors because they invest in my business. I care about my customer that I'm going to acquire, and I care about, alliances and technology partnerships. I'm thinking of technology here, for example, because that's going to help me eventually maybe get purchased and acquired. So with that, if you think about that individual company and that CEO, him or her is always like, well, I don't have enough money to create all these diversity programs that Amazon and Splunk and ServiceNow can create. Well, we have to now want to make a system change. We have to hit them where it hurts. I know this sounds terrible, but it's the truth. And what that means is, we need these subset group of people help us make the bottom line impact. So the investors, the customers, and the potential alliances that are going to eventually get this company acquired. All these three subset of groups and audiences need to make a commitment, to the community that, hey, we have certain values that we abide by. So anyone we do business with should be aligned with that value. And what that leads to is that startup now has to open its hood and ensure that there is equality across the board, that there is, there's no gender parity when it comes to pay. There's equality, there's diversity on your leadership team, right? And there's representation across the board.
Wow, Rashmi, I know you walk the talk every single day. Talk about your
Yeah, definitely, Ashwin. And I love that pay it forward movement. Like apart from that being a movement in and of itself, it's such a great thought to just have in your mind and kind of go kind of experience life in that mindset as well. So definitely like mentoring is something I do. I mentor both middle school and high school and college students. I take that very seriously. But then on the flip side of that coin, I also go and seek out people with different thoughts. Like I believe in diversity of thought, not just diversity of like skin color, the way you are, and so on, the way you identify, so on and so forth. But there's so much to learn just from the person sitting next to you. Like I've learned so much from both Sree and Ayesha, and it's not even been like 20, 30 minutes just yet. And
Hey,
just
she
going
hasn't got anything from me. Ah.
learn from you every
No, no,
single
I'm just
week.
kidding.
Inclusion, man. You should
Every
include
single
the
week.
circle.
You too. But yeah, definitely. Like mentoring is something I do take seriously, and I love to bring this back to the theme of International Women's Day. This year is something that we can choose to challenge. And I personally choose to challenge that hesitation that women probably have and hold. You know you're confident, you know what you know. It's just take that leap of faith, and just any ounce of confidence will shatter that innate inability or that hesitation within you. So I kind of want to like turn the question back. I'm going to play moderator for like 2 seconds, Ashwin, and turn the question back to all of you to just see like what do you choose to challenge this year and onwards.
Rashmi, before everyone mentions what they choose to challenge, I want to add that you're absolutely right what you just said. Women, Kanye West submitted to be a president of the United States of America. So yes, girls, apply for all the jobs.
Yeah,
Every
exactly.
single one of them, even president. Okay, we've got a rock star vice president who represents so many women of color. We're, my father, my uncle, if they're alive today, they would not believe there is a South Asian woman in the White House today. I mean, so absolutely agree with you. So I just want to reiterate and highlight what you just said. So that's all.
And going off of what you just said, that that moment where Vice President Harris was taking her oath, that meme went around where Michelle Obama was like, "Hey, I support you. Look at you rocking the world." That meme went viral, and it's one of my favorite memes
right?
because, yeah,
That's
because
so
it's
much
It is.
so, yeah, you don't see a lot of women also supporting one another. They'll be like, "Hey,
Yeah.
I want to." There's no self-advocation, which is step one. But then there's also advocating for like a fellow woman right next to you, even if you're competing for something.
Yeah. So one thing I would add there, Rashmi, I guess I do believe in mentorship a lot. And there is a difference between mentor and a sponsor. I do believe men have more sponsors to grow in their career, whereas women, I think it's growing a lot in terms of the mentorship. But to find that sponsor who can pull you up, that is really needed. And one ask I would have for all the women who are in the leadership roles is commit yourself to promoting or like sponsoring one female or a diverse candidate every 6 months, right? That's an easy thing to do. And like, it's not just about, okay, cheering for others, make a difference. Because it's easy to cheer, but it's very hard to take that pen and, okay, hey, figure out, okay, I'm going to promote you and I'm going to help you figure out how to do this. So that's
make it actionable. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. I definitely have those type of women in my life today that I am very blessed to have. And I feel confidently where I can say that I also have helped women that are up and coming, right? Because I saw the potential in them. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do everything. I'm going to crawl and fight to help you get up on top because you deserve it. And I think that definitely goes both ways. And I think if we start piggybacking on that, it's just going back to the dominoes effect of pay it forward. That's essentially what it is. We help each other, and that's how we're going to grow. That's how we're going to change diversity and get more diversified, I mean.
So to answer your question, Rashmi, on what is our commitment for the next 6 months, for me, it's more about, okay, hey, can I sponsor somebody and help them grow?
I love that, because all of us, even like Ashwin, you, like all of us are standing on the shoulders of our mentors, teachers, professors, anything, so on and so forth, and then we're helping the future generation to stand on our shoulders through that way. So I love those actionable impacts.
So my answer to you, and again, this is off the cuff, is so one of my future guests is actually somebody that Ayesha made an introduction to, right? Is increasingly trying to get more underrepresented people who can show the way for others, right? So that's my commitment to TeflonTales, right? To make that more of a kind of a small platform that can show how people have of communities that are underrepresented have still showing the way so others can learn from that.
So you mentioned her, Trinika Fields. So I'm going to say it. She's a legal counsel at Splunk, who's a rock star. So yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Just like Trinika Fields, there's Jennifer Leggio, who's this current CMO at Clarity. These women have made such an impact in my life. And I want to continue. And I think this year, I want to identify another group of women that I can help professionally get into cyber, whatever that is. I was recently motivated by someone who we lost in cybersecurity, who's been greatly influential in terms of how she's helped other women. In fact, there were stories about her where she went to a coffee shop and helped a girl working at a coffee shop get into cyber, who's a really successful woman today in cybersecurity. And that really inspired me. I thought it was just me when I was younger she helped. No, it was like 140 people in this call with her. And I think I am going to make a concerted effort at finding people, helping them get into cybersecurity and really helping marginalized group and other women do that.
Wow, so Rashmi, you got 3 commitments.
By the way, you have to hold us accountable too in the next 6 months or whatever time frame.
She will, believe me.
We'll connect again, don't worry.
And I just want to call out Glenn, who called out Ayesha advice. So yeah.
Oh, hi, Glenn. He's my former colleague.
Okay, there you go. Awesome. Again, thank you for your time. Again, taking time off and joining this and sharing your thoughts, and looking forward to continuing dialogue.
Thank you, Ashwin. And you've been a great ally for all the women. So I've known you for many years. So thanks for supporting us as always.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you so much.
Bye.
Bye.